Welcome to the Leadership School podcast. I'm your host, leadership and self-care coach, Kyla Kofer. Here at the Leadership School, you'll hear leaders from around the world sharing their stories and expertise on how to lead with balance and integrity. Our goal? Teach you how to be an extraordinary leader. Welcome back to the Leadership School podcast. I'm here today with Carol Sanford. Carol is a best-selling author. She has done training consulting around the world on a wide variety of topics. Her most recent book, Indirect Work, we spent a lot of time talking about that in this episode. What's really interesting about this episode is that Carol spent a lot of time disagreeing with me and calling me out. And it made for a really interesting conversation, as I would, every single time that I thought that I understood one of her concepts, she would challenge me on it, which I loved. And it made me really, really think. So she spends a lot of time encouraging us to really get into deep thinking and to look at what we're doing with different perspectives and a different mind. And she explains a little bit about that towards the end, about why she's doing that and why she's challenging me. And we talk about how that feels as well. As we're going to get into that a little bit. But I think you're really going to enjoy hearing from Carol, who has a lifetime of incredible wisdom and expertise to share with us. And please make sure you check out the show notes, where it's going to tell you how you can find her best-selling books, how you can be in part of the communities that she leads, and learn more about her process of deep thinking. Carol, thank you so much for joining me on the Leadership School podcast. It's such an honor and pleasure to meet you. And especially as I've gotten to know you and your work, I'm just so impressed with all these things that you've been doing. So can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself? And then I actually have a lot that we're going to talk about, I think, especially because right before I hit record, we said some things that I think we might want to share with our audience too. You just celebrated something big and have things going on. So maybe go ahead and tell us about yourself, and then we'll go back to those things.
Well, I actually hate to introduce myself, so let me do just a couple of things. I am a senior fellow of social innovation for Babson College, which means I try and stir things up a lot. I do that in a couple of other places also. I've written 6 books, all about the concept of regeneration and what that truly means, rather than kind of the banalized versions we're hearing. And I have a podcast called Business Second Opinion, which I'll be closing shortly, but it's got about 150 great narratives, interviews, exciting work. So maybe that gives people enough about me.
Yeah, and we'll have the link to like your podcast and all of those things in our show notes for everybody to do. But you just celebrated a huge milestone. You said you were celebrating yesterday.
Yep.
I guess we're recording this, and when this gets released, it might be some time after that. But tell everybody what you were celebrating, because it's amazing.
Well, on October 3rd, the party was yesterday on the 12th of October. We celebrated my 80th birthday, which is a bit past the average, and I have lived a glorious life. So I feel like I've gotten to make a difference. I've gotten to take on all the things that we used to call a bucket list, because I've worked all over the world with corporations from Google to NewMT to Seventh Generation, all helping them build powerful new kinds of organizations. So we celebrated with a lot of those people who showed up from around the world, some in the middle of the night, and sang and danced, and they made fun of me, but in a most loving way I've ever experienced. So it was a grand celebration.
That's awesome. That's so fun. I mean, and I was saying you have accomplished just in your life a lot of the similar goals that I have. And one of those is to live to be 80 plus years old. So I love talking to you about that. And I think that that's just wonderful to be able to celebrate a full life. And you've got plenty of life ahead of you. You do have a diagnosis. Did you want to share that?
I was diagnosed with ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease, which, as I said, the good news is it takes a few years usually to take your body away from you, that you were alone for a while. So you can all hear that I'm already having quite a bit of trouble speaking, although I think I'm still intelligible. So that's an amazing learning journey because you watch your functionality kind of disappear and all the ways you had to reach out and access people, but you also get to learn about yourself. And I'm doing everything I can to engage in a conscious dying process.
I think this attitude of joy that you have and perspective of joy is just really admirable because you're like, well, the good news is, and this is great because of this. And that's not the typical response to a diagnosis like ALS. So I really admire you for that. And I think that's some of what we kind of want to talk about today. So you have this extensive leadership experience. You are currently working on your 7th book. Several of your books have been bestsellers. And the most recent book, Indirect Work, I read. And as I was reading it, it's a very deep thinking book. It's not a novel. You can't like read it and go, "Oh, that felt good." Like you
Right.
have to really put some effort into it. And it's not a book that you can like in just one sitting go and be like, "Oh, my whole life has changed." You have to put some work into it, which
Right.
as I read it, I found that I, more than just changing who I was, I finished and had this overall feeling of I feel a lot more confident and capable of myself. And that was a really cool feeling. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that book, the one you're writing. But I just want this to be a conversation about your experiences and what does it mean to you to really truly be a leader? How do you define that? Because you have a great deal of incredible, in depth leadership experience. And you have been teaching these skills for a very long time now. And I think that you just have so much wisdom. And I'm just wondering how we can even scratch the surface of that today.
Well, I first have to disagree with two things, and I know you're open to that because that's who you are. I don't believe in leaders. I believe leadership is a process we all engage in, and it's something that more has to do with us getting clear about our direction as early in life as we can and being able to lead ourselves. And then if others it's on their path, we may find ways we lead together. So when I enter a company, I don't talk about leaders. We don't have hierarchical processes. All the educational events that I run are a mixture of people who don't represent but reflect the organization as a whole. So let me tell you a fun story. I took DuPont Corporation, a TiO2 group of hierarchical leaders and a couple of operators to visit Kingsford Charcoal. And I forgot for sure which event Burnside, Kentucky, I think we went to. And of course, TiO2 they make is a white powder, and everything Kingsford Charcoal makes is a black powder made into briquettes. And that's symbolic of the challenge of seeing things in black and white, not seeing subtleties or layers of. And in the room where we met with the Kingsford folks, who had been working with several years ahead of the people, I wanted them to talk to them. There was the groups sharing stories, bouncing around the room, asking the my question, folks' questions, taking them on a tour, and they were all so excited to share. And then when we got in the van to go back, the DuPont guy said to me, they didn't even have their CEO or president there. I said, sure they did. Well, who was that? I didn't see anybody. We didn't do a traditional introduction, just names and a few other things that wouldn't make sense to you right now. What was startling was them to understand that the way they work now was not hierarchical. It was not the quote leaders introducing and leading the discussion. It was a team that we call market field teams had presented work they were doing on the new grill that Kingsford created. And they were, even as we kept driving along the road, they said, well, it was very hard to be able to get our questions answered because we didn't know who was, quote, in charge. All right. So that's a pretty good description of why I don't believe in leaders, right? And it was stark in terms of black and white difference. The way that I guess myself I think about is I have more work to do on leading me to not have my own, I guess, arrogance and hubris out in front that thinks I'm in charge of something. And so For me, every piece of work I do has no program. I don't tell people what to do. I educate them on how to think. Now I have something to lead with. I have ability to lead myself. Again, not other people. I think the minute we think we're leading other people, we're in a behavioral paradigm. And a behavioral paradigm says things come from the outside. And we are conditioned by those rewards, incentives, etc. So I spend a lot of time trying to help people watch themselves, and it's amazing how easy it is to work together when we're not thinking one person's in charge and then there's some reporting authority.
Yes. So I love that you are a shaker. You said you like to shake things up. So the very first thing you did was disagree with me. And that
Right.
just makes me really giddy. I like it. So you're talking about that you teach people to think, which is in your book, Indirect Work. I mean, that's what you're doing. And you talk about how you lean heavily on your background in philosophy, and that it is really is about this process of thinking and becoming resources. And I about cried in your introduction when you led off with Plato's allegory of the cave, because that's just that particular lesson was a pivotal moment for me in my college career and in my life, learning that. And yeah, and you mentioned that. And so when you're teaching people to think, it's not that when you do offer that in trainings and workshops, in careers, and you're educating people on a thought process, that empowers people to make the decisions for themselves and empowers people to become something great for themselves, not because you're asking them to.
So let me disagree with one other thing,
Yes.
just for fun. The word you're using in regard to me is not one I use, which is to teach. Now, let me tell you why. My seventh book, the one that I hope to finish before this crazy disease decides that they're revoking my permit on my body, that is about how it is we learn and what our epistemology is of learning. That is how we come to know, how we come to make sense of things, and our pedagogy, which is how we transfer or help other people learn. So that book is about the difference between a self-determining epistemology, in other words, I'm in charge of what I learn, how I learn, and a authoritative one, which is what 99% of it exists in the world, in schools, businesses, military, where an authority decides what the truth is, the models, the answers to questions, the science, and then they transfer it. And so it's all about knowledge transfer from the authorities. And in fact, we aren't even allowed to grade ourselves on how well we're doing on acquire it. We take tests from a young age, and then our teacher, quote unquote, grades us, and our boss grades us. And the military has people graded. We're not in charge of what we're allowed as an epistemology. And in fact, I work now with lots of educators from elementary school through college at high levels at Stanford, Harvard, and other places. And the important thing I have them look at is how do they remove themselves as the expert and make people experts in charge of their own knowledge. Now, why does this matter? And why am I writing this book? I believe it undermines about everything we hold dear, like democracy. So if you look at how people come to know what the truth is right now, and it doesn't matter what your politics are, left, right, middle, center, somewhere along the scale. You go to a source, the same one over and over again, who pre-digests, does all your thinking for you, and because they are your source, that's where your understanding comes from. So I'm working on everything I can to help people see that the behavioral model of education and knowing and quote teaching all are undermining democracy. So we end up with the pockets of experts who are followed, who are quote thought leaders, right? And we have almost no one who helps people learn to think for themselves, assess, and make sense of what's happening. The need to change our epistemology will change our ability to manage climate change, injustice, inequity, all the racism, because all of those ideas are coming from pockets that people go follow who are their leaders. So I'm trying to also undermine a bit the whole idea of leaders.
Yeah, well, in your book, you mentioned, and I think this is what you're talking about, is the different levels of worldviews where you've
Yep.
got the authority. And can you tell me just really specifically, like, what are those three different levels? And maybe how do we move from one level to another? Or is it even moving from one level to another? Because I mean, I've noticed in my life how I've kind of done that. And I've gone from the authority level to different ones. So let's be really explicit about what those three levels are and how we move in and out of those.
All right. I may give you a different version because every
Sure.
book I write, I outgrow the minute I finish it.
I know, right?
Yeah. And one of the things I put in the book to illustrate it, well, let me tell you what you're talking about first. I may give you 4 paradigms, and they include the ones that were in there. The most base one is the authoritative or the extract value where someone is in charge and guides others.
That's kind of what you were talking about a second ago when you were talking about like the teachers teach us things and then we
Yes.
regurgitate that. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, there are some who are in the classroom, do 2 others in the middle, rarely the top. But the next one up is what in the book I call do good, or the humanist, or the view of where you're trying to do good in the world, be a philanthropist, to help open others up. But there's one I didn't put in the book below it, which is arrest disorder. So you go from the one where you absorb ideas from others, so-called experts. And by the way, science isn't a guarantee that you're getting right answers, but that I'll do more of that book 7. It doesn't mean you're not getting something right. So I'm not arguing against don't ever trust science and all that, fake news and stuff. But you have to learn to examine them. So that level of arrest disorder is where we decide a bunch of things are wrong. And there are a bunch of things wrong, like how we treat the planet, how we treat people that are not our class or our color order, and children who are different in the choices or the life experience they have, and we put them beside. Those are particular paradigms or worldviews that get us in trouble. So we've got 3 of the lower ones, all of which are about externally determined, either by an authority or by a set of agreements we have with one another about. So sustainability is one of those arrest disorder. And that's because all it does is try and stop the bad. And then do good is the third one. But all of them come from external ideas. Somebody else decides. The one I'm working on getting people to look at, and I can't remember, in the book that I call it Evolve Capacity or Regenerate Life. Do you remember which one I called it?
I don't remember which one you called
Okay.
it. No.
Well, the idea is the same. They are, you start from the essence of an individual, from themselves, or a place in its story, or a business in its story, and you find the essence of what's at work there and help it be expressed. Not you impose on it with authority or the program or your ideals of do good. If we built schools in a way that people could self-reflect, they could work on discovery and testing. So when I quote teach, and I teach at several universities in Europe and here, and I always say my opening line is, don't trust me. Don't accept anything I tell you without testing it with your own life experience in a reflective way, not in a pushing back because you're going to argue with me, but go test it in life, and don't accept anything I give you without testing it. And that's what I did in the Indirect Work, the book you just read, where I created at the end of every chapter something called intermezzos. An intermezzo happens in an opera or theater. We often in the States call them intermissions, but in Europe and in places where there are people who create little conversations in those windows, they're using them to reflect on the meaning of what just happened. And what they're thinking and questioning. And I encourage people who read Indirect Work, and we'll have a version of that in the new book too, to not take notes, not read and underline, read and say, how does this fit with my life? Well, I think I'll go try that, and now reflect on it. Don't become the adopter. That's what that means, because it's called a bestseller or something. The intermezzos are examples of getting to the top regenerate life level of paradigms, where in every situation you're in charge of your own self-determining process to think better, think deeper, question, and only after you've really done that do you have a right to go or an obligation to go to the next chapter. Because now you're going forward with your own thinking, not just what you adopted from me. And I had 120 people who pre-read the book, and I gave them the instruction: do not read past the intermezzos without doing them. 50% read through and sent me back and said, well, I know you said not to read Babson, but I wanted to know all your ideas before I went back and then tried to underline and figure out what I wanted to keep. That's like the whole opposite point of the book, right? So, unfortunately, self-selected people still didn't do the work.
Well, doing the work is sometimes scary and hard. And
Yes,
we like to avoid those types of things.
right.
And that thinking for ourselves can also be scary, especially if we come from backgrounds of maybe being abused or being told that there are
Yeah,
severe consequences by not following a certain way, like in religious life or just in family life. There are consequences of sometimes thinking for ourselves. And that can be really scary and can take a long time through adulthood. And sometimes we never get there of
right.
I can take these thoughts and make them my own, because you feel like you're going to lose something if you do. So how do we approach our careers, our life, our thought processes with the courage to make these thoughts our own when there might be consequences?
Yeah. Well, you've just hit on the nugget about why this epistemology we have of knowledge transfer is so dangerous. Individuals have a very hard time doing this alone. I long ago stopped doing any work with individuals, and part of this was the trigger. They could see that it was a great idea, but it meant they might have to give up their tribe, their community, their family. And if you have family members who, when you go home for holidays, and we just had Yom Kippur, and a guy was just telling me, I have my way of celebrating it. My family has a more traditional way. And it was very hard because I love my family. And so what I did was being quiet. So what's the answer? Your question, what do we do? Here's what we do. You join a community that's working on building critical thinking skills alongside personal development. Because if you don't work on the personal side of all the conditioning that you've had and the development of your own critical thinking skills, or regenerative thinking skills, I call them, and personal self management, you can never, ever, ever be who your essence would lead you to be in the world. You're always reactive to the community or the tribe you're in, and you're identified with them. I and them are the same. If they reject me, I'm not me anymore. Learning to see that, and learning to also quit doing fabrications in our head of how awful it will be. I mean, people go to therapy for nothing else for decades, right? Well, I'm not opposed to therapy, but I think the more powerful way to do it is be in communities. So I quit doing any individual, and I'm trained also as a psychologist. I have degrees and things like that. And I quit doing a psychological path and moved toward more the philosophical path with communities of people. So this last weekend, my birthday party yesterday was planned by my communities of thousands of people, and we come together depending on which of two streams you're in, business stream or change agent. We come together 8 times a year for a day, day and a half, 2 days, depending on the group and the event. And I bring experiences and papers that have intermezzos in the form of active exercises where people get used to discerning their own brainwashing and become, over a series of years, very courageous, but never judgmental. That's the real thing. When we think we have to judge others to reject, we don't. We can help them learn to think for themselves. So, in order for this fear you're talking about, rejection, and all those what I call energy drains, they drain us, right? For those to be seen and managed and slowly dissolved into at least ephemeral kind of things, you have to be in community that's working on development, not complaining, not talking to each other, not commiserating, not networking, but deep development. And I describe those, I think, in the back of this book. I can't remember. I have them in the back of most of my books, How to Work from Community. What do you think of that?
Hey, thanks so much for listening. Since you've listened this far, it tells me you're really enjoying the content. And I'm so, so grateful. I work really hard to bring you some awesome resources to help really enhance your leadership game. If you're liking this, can you pause really quickly? Make sure you're subscribed, but then also share with one person or more people who you think could really benefit from the content. My goal is to really bring this into some of the top podcasts on leadership in the world. And you can help get there and help us grow by sharing this with everyone you know. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're enjoying the episode. Well, I think that's beautiful. And if I think about the times in my life when I have made significant changes, it's because of the people that I was surrounded by. And it was because I was able
Right.
to be supported in community. And one of my values is connection. And that's both internally and externally, connecting to the world around us, but connecting to myself as well. And I just see that I really believe that we cannot grow and have well being, cannot have personal development, cannot have, I still believe in leaders, even if you don't, that's okay, have that strong leadership without strong connections. And that's one thing you're talking about. We've got to have that type of community that kind of supports us and that we support and we are encouraging each other. I mean, when you're in a community and you can tell somebody with confidence and courage to say, don't take my word for it, figure it out for yourself. And when your opening line for your talks that you give, that really allows people the freedom to disagree with you and freedom to think for themselves. And it gives you the same thing within that context. You guys are allowing each other to open yourself up to new ideas. And that's where innovation and creativity can happen.
So let me talk about what I do with the leaders and things, because the leaders are a hindrance if they are saying to other people whatever knowledge transfer. So I convert all leaders, whether they're supervisors, managers, facilitators, whatever they are, to resources. Resource is like if you spell it RE-SOURCE, it means you return people to themselves as the source. And all you do is give them a process. And you may ask them questions, not because you have answers, because it's designed to help them explore using what I call frameworks, living system frameworks, which enable people to do their own work. And there are no external authorities who supposedly knew better, because people rotate who's the resource. There's no person who is always in that role. So I encourage you to think about the potential of transferring all the ideas of leader into resource, because that is an epistemological shift of putting people in charge of themselves. And it's very hard to do. And it was hard for me. I had to give up being an expert. My God, I worked for 50 years to be an expert. And then I was proclaimed as one. I had a whole bunch of bestsellers and a thought leader. And then I figured this out. Oh my God, this is the worst idea on the face of the earth. And I had built leadership training. I worked with top leaders, CEOs of DuPont, a bunch of smaller companies or mid-sized, and to work on giving up being an expert and a leader took me pounding me into the ground and going and searching every paper I'd written and try and remove where I introduce myself as a leader. So being a resource means I now have humility enough to know I need to be resourced, and we can rotate in the next round, and I'll be happy to do what I can for you, but I don't know more than you, and I'm not in charge of more than you.
And I love this. And I think you've even said this before of we're not in charge of other people. And that's kind of basic boundaries too. But just remembering it's not our job. And I know you've said this, it's not our job to do things so that people change or trying to change people and be in charge of other people, but just being that space for people to support, to share what we know and to learn what they know
No,
and
no, no, no,
to
no, no,
go
no,
back and forth. No,
no.
none of that.
No, none of that. You don't share. Sharing is an external, I have a thought for you. You ask questions, they're based on a framework. You don't do anything that's externally seen as transferring. You don't tell your story. You don't encourage them. All of that takes you into a role that's playing something to do so. And this is so hard to see.
Well, yeah. So, how does that play out though in real life when we're at a major company or a small business or we're running an organization and we are working towards goals? We have to be on the same page for those goals. We're trying to accomplish things, we're trying to like get the product out the door. I mean, how does that play out like in real life? Of, okay, I can't tell you what I know, but I know how to use the software. Like, I know how the program works. I know what we're trying to do here.
That's a different, all right. I'm not
Yeah.
talking about that at all.
Okay.
What I'm talking about is having an ongoing learning process inside of an organization
Okay.
that works in a way that gets people to develop their own thoughts. And mostly in my companies, I usually own stock, but they're not mine. What you're doing is working in communities or groups around a particular customer or a particular distributor. And you're making decisions about who has what capabilities needed to pull that off and who wants to grow and do something better. Now, what we do is when the minute we want to grow, what we do is switch as much as we can into a learning community. And there are certain times when there's training. Training is not development. It's you learn how to run a machine safely or code safely. And what you can still within that do resource development where you give people a framework to think about it. I always start with finding out what people know, having them know what they know, and then what it is they want to learn next. So you're kind of conflating two things. One is the running of the business, and the other is the development of thinking capability.
Well, that makes sense. I'm glad you distinguished that because I don't know how that got like mixed up for me, but it does make sense. So, what I'm hearing then is what you're talking about is more of like bigger picture, larger goals, moving culture, moving the way that we interact with each other, moving our thought processes, the way we approach situations and decisions. And that seems to be more what you're talking about. Is that right?
Well, it includes all that, but it's always in natural work teams where they're actually applying it immediately. So it's not a training. I've never tried to describe this, and it's not a good idea because it so much removes eventually the hierarchy. It's not like you go be in the hierarchy in one side and learn in another. When you're in the learning group, the hierarchy is mixed up and you're in a team and no one's in charge. When you go out and you all the work is redesigned for day to day. I haven't talked about that at all. There are, besides the fact that there are no hierarchies, we work with something called promises beyond ableness.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also because you get really excited. You're so passionate about these things too. It's beautiful. It's so fun to hear that your passion behind everything because you put a lot of work into it.
I don't have passion. I don't have passion. And if I do, I'm in trouble. And I can feel that happening right now. And I'm trying to manage it because passion means pain. Literally means pain. And it comes from people suffering. So what I do is worry about my ability to say things in a way that will confuse people. And so I feel like I'm doing that right now. But this disease also affects your breathing and eventually suffocates you. So it is literally me having trouble breathing. And we'll see how much longer I can talk before I can't. I want to try and get one thing clear, because the work design becomes individuals and teams committing to do something for a customer or a consumer or a distributor or Earth in a way that they have to learn something to do it. And so, for example, in South Africa, I have this young man who was a black African who ran a detergent tower where they made laundry soap. And Isaac also committed because Colgate, the company, he was supporting all this happening, and he wanted to take their product and create a new kind of business in the townships. Now, he had never been to high school or any kind of school because they were forbidden to do that. We by then had no bosses, no one in charge of delegation. Isaac said, I want to create oral health in the townships. Now, that's not part of his job description, but everyone, 100% of people, came up with something they wanted to use Colgate's platform for to change. And a lot of it was about the townships then. And he built a system that worked with women who were respected in becoming oral health educators, plus being able to make money off of selling toothpaste and oral health products. And he attended special development session we had about how to learn to work with people, how to design processes, how to design education. And then he went out and did them. And he worked with dentists and economic development people. So this is so different. He was no longer working on detergent towers with what we taught. 100% of the people in Colgate had a project, I guess you call it. And that was a 2.5 year project for him. So you change what people work on every day. And you don't have bosses who tell you how to do it. You have resources. So everyone who used to be a boss, a supervisor, or manager, now was a resource to Isaac and to the 3,000 other people who work there. Can you feel how different that is?
Yes, that makes sense. That's a great picture and perspective of how that operates.
And my newest book, in every book, I talk a little bit about South Africa because it's so radically different than most of us think about working. And because it was in a transition, and we had Mandela's support, and he gave Colgate a big award for what we did in changing how people thought business could work. But when I do have fewer stories in the US, because the US is less open to really redesigning, reconceiving, getting rid of everything we call a hierarchy. Although we don't get rid of hierarchies, I keep saying that. They dissolve them when they don't make sense. I don't have any design for we get rid of all these people. We never had one person fired, not one, no one left. Well, one guy left, but he was so racist he couldn't get beyond what we were doing. So,
Wow. So approaching our work without having hierarchies means that we're all working together to support each other and to grow.
no, to support customers and the market. That's a big shift. You don't support each other. You work together to support the customer community, the township. When you do that, you have to figure out how to work together. But that's the problem with most work design. It says work with cooperation, with supporting each other. That's all internally focused. What you want is people working so that customers' lives are transformed, consumers' lives are transformed, distributors' businesses are transformed, and you become their strategist and their marketing and R&D. So it's all fundamentally
And
different.
it's not really about like the product, the money, the power. It's about making the world better and about transforming things and transforming people in the world and doing what in our mind we understand what it takes to make the world a better place.
Well, yes and no. Sorry.
No, this is great.
Yeah.
I'm learning so much. You're making me really think, and this isn't just a conversation of like, agreeing with each other. It's a let's push to think more and to
Right.
think more deeply and think more creatively, really, about how we're approaching the work that we do.
I know, and I love talking to you because you're up for this. And it helps your listeners because it disrupts them when they're listening in a way that I can't do because I can't reach them and you can't either directly. But us engaging this way changes a lot. All right. So why I interrupted this time? My clients grow their businesses even when they are frontline, like seventh generation, making baby products and household products. They grow their businesses in revenue terms 35 to 65% a year the first 5 years. That is easily 10 times what an average business working directly on making more money would make. And they contribute more because they have no sustainability programs, no DEI diversity programs, no equity and justice programs. What they have is learning how all that works when it's working well, and we make it happen in the process of doing work. Every person who creates a promise like Isaac has to say in their plan how much they expect to improve earnings, margins, and cash flow. So everybody thinks when you go work on making the world better, you stop talking about money. No, you talk about it in a different way because what improves revenue, which is the big growth door, cash flow, is being able to match exactly what the market is needing in terms of life changes, what makes things work for them. So you're not working on trying to make the world better directly. You work on making the stakeholders to the business more successful. And my gosh, what it does is it grows earnings, margin, and cash flow through the roof. And the way the payment increase happens for Isaac is he agrees to get a certain return on having made that happen. So you don't have competition for pay increases and there's only so much to go around. If you produce an enormous amount in the market, you get to participate in that. It's a gain sharing kind of program, but not the way that they're normally described. So you can't say this is not about the money because you don't get to keep playing in the world of business. You don't have investors. You don't have customers if you're not paying attention. But money is a reflector of your ability to make things work better for your stakeholders.
There's just so much to think through, and I know you've put them in your books and your trainings, and so this is clearly more than we can talk about in our conversation. So I'm so glad that we're scratching this. And really, I think what we're trying to do in this conversation is just to change the way we think and to change our approaches and to push ourselves to
Yeah.
think deeper and to allow ourselves to think more creatively and to question the way that we've done things and think, well, maybe there's other ways. And what other ways can we do this? What are other approaches? How many ideas can we possibly come up with here?
No, you don't want to have any ideas.
Uh,
No, that's brainstorming, which is very destructive. What you want is the more precision in thinking. You, the kind, and it's not a training I do. I do development work in improving your ability to use frameworks and manage your mind so you aren't generating an idea a minute. That will scatter your energy, will destroy the company. I've watched people get so excited about brainstorming. What I'm doing is teaching people a set of frameworks which supplant the mental models they have, the ones they learned in business school or from some consultants who bring in tons of those kind of things. You learn a very method focused way of developing yourself and really learning to self-observe. That's at least 50% of the work. We are our own most destructive contributors. So let me give you an example of how we do that. We learn to watch all the time while we're working through a framework called modes of behavior, which I didn't create. It's very ancient. Pythagoras had a version of it. Gurdjieff and John Bennett had a version. Socrates had a version. And here's my current words for it. can we see when we're reactive? That is, we're being told or engaged, and inside of us, we go crazy and we get upset. You're a beautiful example of not doing that, because if we can't learn to manage our reactivity, you will feel put upon by me, because I'm actually challenging your work, how you make a living. And it means that I'm asking you to question what you're identified with, because most people know what they're getting into when they invite me. So very few do invite me. They aren't willing to put up with me. But the learning to notice that when I challenge them, that they feel scared or angry or confused.
I would say also inadequate.
Inadequate, right? And none of those are true. My job is to disrupt certainty. That's my essence. And I do it everywhere I go because it's so needed, because we're so identified with our paths and our language and our lesson plans we give people, right? Our curriculum. So learning to come and work in a way that you're not only learning about a new way to do strategic thinking and a new way to do performance indices and finance and a new way to define what our customers are that are not niches and not in categories, and learning new business models and 1,000 other things is not easy, because we mostly translate it. And you can hear you doing this, I'm sure. You hear me say something, you think, oh, I know what that means. You say it back to me, and I say, no, that's not what I mean.
Yep.
So, right, most people do that. We translate through the lens we've got. We have to learn to not do that. So that's what my work is helping stop some of those things that get in our way by giving you instruments that allow you to do so.
Yeah, actually, I just have the last two questions for you,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Yes.
I want to ask you my two questions I'm asking every guest this season, and it's what does integrity mean to you?
All right. So my biggest worry about the world and the consultants and teachers is they work on from fragmented worldviews. So fragmented means we decide we want to work on nature, which isn't even a thing, and we chop it up in studying trees and rivers and so forth, pieces of something. And then when we get an idea that we're actually fragmenting the world, we start to say, well, I don't want to do that. And we go to the next level, which is integration. Now, that's not far enough, but integration means I try and stop myself and put things back about how they're connected. Now, I do think the word integrity means that I'm living consistent with what my beliefs and values are of some sort. But what I really want people doing is going beyond integration and working from wholes. And the way to learn to do that is to watch it at work. So if you want to see a child as a whole, you watch them trying to help the family and help work with another child. If we try and teach them how to behave with integrity, they're not in a value adding process. So for me, I've got again a third level that I think takes us beyond integrity. Anyway, that's my interpretation.
Oh, yeah. Well, my other question then is what does it look like to you to be balanced? You have traveled all over the world. You have raised children. You are now a grandmother. You have writing books. You've got tons of things going on. What does the word balance mean to you?
Well, to me, balance comes from you having your essence leading everything. And I don't most people divide up personal or work life. That seems insane to me. My daughter is my business partner. My grandson is in my developmental groups. My son, I'm on his board and we work on his business and where he's going. And so I don't understand when people say they're out of balance, what I assume they mean, because my disease, by the way, is not from poor lifestyle. We think it's from brain injuries, right? And I did fall quite a bit and had a bit of abuse as a child. So I couldn't have lived a healthier life. But what I did do is made sure that I knew what my work was from a young age. And it wasn't as purpose. I don't believe in me having a personal purpose. I believe I serve purposes of a greater whole. If I'm serving something greater and I'm growing and learning, and I don't divide up my life in pockets, then I can keep on course with my essence, with my direction. And that's probably my best way to describe what balance is it's about doing the work you came to do until they take your body back and you don't get to do it anymore.
Is there anything that you just feel like that you really want people to hear? People are growing, learning. People who are listening to this podcast are really just trying to do their own personal development work and really challenging who they are and the way they go about things. But with all the things that you've said and mentioned, all of the work that you've done, is there any like one key piece that you want to make sure that we get this point across today?
Do it in community and take your whole family into the community. You can't do it alone. There's no human being alive who has ever succeeded. We think they are, but even Mandela, who I met, said all the people, he wanted people to quit honoring him because he said, I just happen to write and speak more. But there were so many of us. So find the community. You can find advice on that. And you can look at whether or not some of the communities I run would support you. As long as I'm still alive, I will keep doing them. So make sure you're in community.
That's awesome. Thank you, Carol. All of your information is going to be in our show notes so we can make sure we can find you and read these amazing books and really do this work of deep thinking and transformation. I thank you so much for being willing to challenge me today
Yeah.
and disagree with me and have a great conversation and just being willing to take your time out of your day. I'm very, very grateful.
Well, Kyle, it's been great to be with you.
Hey, thank you so much for listening. If you've liked what you heard and you want some more tools and resources to help you on your journey, go check out kylakofer.com/free stuff.